Hey guys, Dan at Ochiko Bushcraft. Well, you've probably heard the old saying, two heads are better than one. Well, I got a new one. Two snares are better than one. Right behind me, which I'm about to show you, is something called a trapeze snare. And what a trapeze snare is it's two separate snares attached to the same trigger. And it can be set on a trail, or it can be just set down like at the base of trees where squirrels are active and baited. Variety ways. I'm using 24 gauge snare wire for my snares. I'm gonna try to explain to you guys exactly what I've done and break it down on how to make one of these. So this right here is a setup for a trapeze snare. First, you need a stake, and you pound the stake into the ground. You cut a stake notch or a 7-notch in it, and you're going to take another stick, and it's going to sit right inside that 7-notch. So I have a 7-notch right here. I carved a little notch, just a circle notch around each end of the twig, and tied my cordage to it here and here. They are tied to another piece of cordage here, which I have tied to a bent sapling. And you don't necessarily need a bent sapling. You can use a forked stick with a lever and a weighted rock on the other end, and it'll spring up actually even better than the sapling. But for demonstration purposes, I just wanted to show you guys the sapling. So in addition, and I don't know if you guys can see this very good, but I have two snares. I have a small one, 2-inch snare right here. It's made out of that gold 24 gauge wire, and I have another snare loop right here, 24 gauge wire. So I have one set on each side. And I said, this is a great snare for both squirrels and rabbits. Be set on a trail where the squirrels are real active without bait, or you could put some bait on it. So the nice thing about this snare is that no matter what direction something comes from, it will trigger the snare. If it comes through this loop and goes this way, it's going to trigger the whole thing that way. If it goes through this way, it's going to trigger the whole thing that way. Same with the other side. So if something comes through and he connects with the snare and he comes out and he starts pulling and struggling, just like that, bam, he trips it. And like I said, and you've got a snare on each side. So if this was an active area, you have two chances of catching rather than just one. You've got two different loops. And it's, your trigger setup is basically looks like a trapeze. That's why it's called a trapeze snare. And as I said before, it sits right down in your stake and right in the notch that I had, the 7-notch. And again, it doesn't matter whether you've got a loop set here, a loop set here. Squirrels are running back and forth. They're real active. They're curious. Maybe you sprinkled a couple little pine nuts or something down there, and he comes through. And like I said, it doesn't matter which side he comes through. If he pulls it this way, same thing. Bam. And you've got him up off the ground in the air, which is the idea. I need to actually set this a little bit higher if I was setting it for live game, but the idea is to just get them up off the ground, because when they're on the ground they can fight back and forth. They may be able to work themselves loose. Once they're up in the air and this is tight around their neck or their body and they're hanging, their odds of them struggling loose are far less. So one more time, guys, trapeze snare. You need a stake with a 7-notch, just a stick. I made two little notches, just a groove basically cut around to put my cordage in, and also to put my snare wire in. My snare wire is wrapped around the same notch and then around the rope a few times on each side so that it's real secure. Got my snare wire right here. Going to set it for the size animal I want, say squirrels. Set a 2-inch snare out here. about 2 inches off the ground. I had a little stick here to just kind of hold it in place. And there we go. Come on. And you're good to go. And you know, and like I said, you got 2 chances rather than 1 because you got it on each side. Cordage is tied to your tree or a weighted lever, tied to, this is just basically a loop tied to each side of the stick, and then this is tied to that, and bam. Guys, thanks again for tuning in to Ochiko Bushcraft. Take care.